All right. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Jazziz Last Call. I'm your host, Brian Zimmerman. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different. The bar is already closed. The lights are low, but there is going to be a fascinating conversation going on between Jazz's publisher Michael Fagien and Jon Anderson, the lead vocalist of the prog rock band Yes. We're going to be eavesdropping on that conversation in a minute. But first, I'd like to let you know about a new album from ECM Records. That would be Big Vicious by trumpeter Avishai Cohen and his group of the same name, Big Vicious. This is a really cool record. Avishai has a ton of eclectic influences. From modern jazz to kind of a prog rock thing, electric music, raga music, Israeli music. A lot of cool covers on this one too, including Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven and Teardrop by Massive Attack. So it's a cool new direction from Avishai. Definitely want to check this album out at ecmrecords.com. Wanted to also let you know that our summer 2020 issue is now available. This one is all about the age of fusion. As you could see, piano master Chick Corea on the cover there. We have a wide-ranging interview with him in this issue. Fortunately, all of the content from this print issue has been converted into web articles that you can read on our website, jazziz.com. You will need a digital subscription to read them, but right now we're offering a special subscription rate to Jazz's Last Call viewers for just 99 cents per month for 3 months. You can receive unlimited digital access to all of the articles in this print issue and previous print issues. And come fall, when we're about to send our next print issue, we will enroll you to receive a complimentary issue. It's coming out in September. It is all about the art of the album, articles about listening to albums, collecting albums, producing albums, album cover art. So yeah, you sign up now, you get unlimited digital access, which means you could read all of the content from this issue and previous issues, plus come fall, a complimentary print issue in your mailbox. Real quick before we move on, wanted to also let you know about Blue Sound, an award-winning wireless high-res sound system, kind of one of those multi-room systems where you could bounce a song, perhaps a Yes song, from room to room to room. You can learn more about all of their amazing products at bluesound.com or by checking out our website, jazziz.com, where we have put together a Blue Sound buyer's guide. All right, as I mentioned, our guest today is Jon Anderson, singer-songwriter best known as the lead vocalist for the prog rock band Yes, which he co-founded in 1968 with bassist Chris Squire. Now, I love Yes as much as the next guy, except for when the next guy is Jazz's founder and publisher, Michael Fagien, who is our resident Yes fanatic. So without further ado, let's go ahead and eavesdrop on this fascinating conversation between Jazz's publisher, Michael Fagien, and Jon Anderson. Cheers, everyone.
Hello, it's Michael Fagien, editor-in-chief of Jazziz, here with a very special edition of Last Call. And for those podcast listeners, also on Jazziz Not What You Think. I'm here with none other than truly the most recognizable voice in progressive rock. I say one of the most recognized voice in rock, Mr. Jon Anderson. Welcome, Jon.
Hey there.
It's great to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You and Yes, despite all the other projects you've done, are truly inseparable. Would you agree?
From
being associated to only Yes, even though you've done, I think you've done a lot more projects than actually Yes albums outside of Yes, yet everyone associates you with Yes.
Well, you know, I'm very, very grateful for so much connection with Yes. It's 50 years of my life. You know, I
Yes.
never left Yes. I just carry on making music, and it's a blessing to have so much success in life. And I always feel like I work harder now to survive this world and make great music still.
Yeah. So if I could take you back, and then we're going to bring you all the way up to your new album. You know, in the early days was, from what I remember as a fan, an extremely prolific time for you. I mean, putting out an album, you know, at least one a year for like between 1969 and 75 or 76. And, Yes wasn't doing simple pop compositions. So that had to be incredibly stressful, not only for you, but for your band members.
Not really. We were very thankful for having a lot of fans, especially around the world then. We did Fragile and Close to the Edge in the same year. And we just released the Yes album 3 months earlier. So we were on a roll and we were young and foolish. So why not?
Well, sure. But now, of course, I've been in the record label business as well. And one of the things I noticed is when you're doing something different and the record label people don't get it, they're quick to say, I don't think this is going anywhere. I think we should drop the band. And I had read stories years ago about maybe the first or second album. The people at Atlantic Records were like, I'm not sure what they're doing here. It started out with sort of this deconstructing pop, covers and doing these very cool, grungy, instrumental, long progressive passages. And then the turning point was kind of the Yes album, when I think that was your first album with all original material.
Yeah. See, by then it took us a while to decide what kind of music we were going to solidify who we were. And by then we toured all over Europe and we got to know better. And then I started writing with Steve and all things started to happen. And me and Chris were writing. So by then we felt the third album was really, we all felt great about it, the Yes album. And then just went to a farm in Devon, in England, and spent a good month together just composing ideas, which became Fragile. So we just realized that we were having success, and I was very Napoleonic, and come on, we got to work hard and it's like crazy and survive.
Napoleonic, self-described Napoleonic culture. Did you sometimes feel like Paul McCartney, like you were herding cats? Like it was, you had this drive maybe more than some of the others and you had to constantly push, or did it come more natural than that?
It was very simple. They listened to ideas I had and they would start acting their ideas. So within the space of an hour, everybody had these ideas and they all gelled together and created what became very classic Yes music. It was just an extraordinary experience to realize that by the time we did Close to the Edge and then Topographic and so on, that all the way through the 70s, we were still musically growing and coming up with pretty wild ideas. Yes, yeah, let's use names on stage, things like that. So.
Well, I mean, speaking of wild ideas, again, going back to the record labels, the Atlantic Records, I was one of the few blessed people who got to know Nisui and Ahmet, and they were jazz guys, but they seemed to also get Yes. Do you remember back then the support that you got from the Erdoğans?
Yeah, Ahmet and Nezri, especially Ahmet. I remember him turning to me one day after Close to the Edge. He said, "Well, you just keep making music because you're obviously not made to make pop music." I said, I think you're right. Always felt we were too old to be pop stars and things. So all of a sudden, in the 80s, we became pop stars, 90125. But that was a pretty revolutionary album anyway, sound-wise as well.
Yeah, it certainly was a direction that was kind of a right or a left turn, whatever you want to call it. But before you got there, you were pop stars. I mean, in my eyes, I mean, roundabout was a song that we heard over and over again here in the States, and I know worldwide. And was that an accident? I mean, because you, like you said, you weren't really intending to be rock stars.
No, it's an 8 minutes of music on record and on stage. There's a middle section. And we were driving around Pennsylvania rehearsing, and we heard Roundabout on the radio, and it got to halfway through the song and it went straight to the solo. And we said, what happened? So I called up Larry Greenberg, I think his name was, at Atlantic, and said, what happened to that Roundabout? It's somebody cut it in half. He said, yeah, it's for the radio, don't worry. So, okay.
Don't worry, be happy. So back then, in the early 70s, it seems like, and I was into progressive rock long before I was ever into jazz. I went from the Beatles being depressed when they broke up to learning about you and Yes, to then sort of fusion. But I remember back in the day in the 70s, progressive rock bands like King Crimson, Genesis, ELP, Jethro Tull, Pink Floyd, Gentle Giant, a whole bunch of others. And they were popping up. PFM, I remember, Happy the Man, some of these bands that that never even became that well known. There were tales about the rivalry, for instance, between the Beatles and the Beach Boys. The Beatles would release an album, then the Beach Boys would do Pet Sounds, and then the Beatles would say, oh, we have to top that. Was there ever that kind of thing going on in the progressive rock world?
No, I never listened to anybody that much. The first band me and Chris saw that woke us up was King Crimson. They were playing in the Speakeasy, their first show, and they played their whole In the Court of the Crimson King album.
Wow.
And I looked at Chris and said, man, we got to start fucking rehearsing hard.
Really, got to do some of that.
Yeah, but we wouldn't copy them, you know. We just went on with that road that we were creating. And the next thing that happened, we were doing a show in New York State, and the Kinks were the headliners, and we were Icon, and the band that opened up the show was Mahavishnu Orchestra. And we watched them rehearse, and I looked at Chris and said, we got to rehearse more, because these guys are unbelievable. And they were ridiculous. But we never really copied each other in the 70s, as far as I remember. It was like, we'll just play our music, we'll create our energy. And when you look back at Relayer and, you know, Sound Chaser and things like that, these are crazy ideas. But on stage, the audience, 10,000, 15,000 people would sit there listening avidly. It was amazing.
Yeah, and I felt the same way as one of those guys in the audience. I mean, one of the things that I do recall, I wouldn't miss a Yes live show, because not only was I so overwhelmed by the musicianship, your singing, the whole compositions and arrangements, but the stage, especially when you got to, I think it was maybe Tales of Topographic Oceans was the first, where the stage was so elaborate that it was just overwhelming, breathtaking. When you walked into the room and saw that stage and saw that you were visually being sort of thrown Tales of Topographic Ocean, sort of that Roger Dean thing as a visual, in addition to what was happening musically. It was quite spectacular.
Well, very simple. The auditoriums were so big, and I always felt the people at the back needed a visual show because I was so tiny on stage. So that's why we got laser beams like that. And just, you know, they were paying money to come and see a show. So we thought we should put on a show. And Roger and his brother looked after that side of things. But the interesting thing was Mike Tate, who was our original roadie, started to become my lighting guy on stage. And now he runs Tate Towers, one of the biggest production companies in the world. It's amazing how we all grew together in the 70s about creation and sound and everything like that.
So your original drummer, Bill Bruford, I got to know Bill over the years as he moved into jazz. And so was that an issue? When I say issue, did you note that when he was the drummer of Yes, that maybe he was too jazzy for Yes?
I think there was only one time that I remember we wanted a very, very simple drum groove on a song. And he was doing a lot of stuff, which I loved. But I just seemed to play. Could you play this like Ringo Starr? I can't believe I said that. Can you play Ringo Starr? And he actually did. But I think inside he was very pissed off with me. But 90% of the time, I just let him do what he wanted to do. Him and Chris, they were always a little bit argy-bargy at times. After years later, I asked him, why did he leave the band? He said, well, me and Chris wasn't always on time in his. But I always said, the bass drum is the beginning of the beat. And Chris would say, no, it's the bass guitar. I said, okay. I'm not going to argue.
Yeah, and he went off to do a lot of very eclectic, very interesting jazz projects, which he loves. And I talked to him a couple of weeks ago. He said, I retired from music. That's his parting line now.
His last album was unbelievable. What was the name of the band again?
Earthworks?
Yes. One side of the album, there are two sides to the album, was quite unbelievable, musically speaking. The other side was very sort of commercially, like the record company got to him. But one side,
give me a single.
Yeah. I had that one time. I was at Geffen Records for 5 minutes. I did an album called Toltec, and it was all about Carlos Castaneda and the mystery of the indigenous cultures that we are so blind to. And the A&R guy rang me up and said, we've just listened to the album. We don't hear. I said, okay, put the phone.
Yeah.
So we gave it Windham Hill. But it's a beautiful album. I don't care what they thought.
Well, I was talking the other day with Gino Vanelli, and he had the same artistic conflicts back in the day with Arista, where they wanted him to do they wanted him to sing Air Supply tunes, and he was like, no, I write my own music. I do my own thing.
Yeah.
And that ended that relationship, kind of like yours with Geffen. So you mentioned about stories. One of the things that the first time, look, I got it with Fragile and with these amazing album covers, and then it really hit me over the head when Tales of Topographic Ocean came out. I would have friends over, and we were in high school. We would have listening parties and talk about the album, talk about the lyrics, talk about the whole concept. And there were a lot of great stories there that I know you acquired through reading. I hear you're an avid reader, and you get these ideas and these concepts, and you like to bring them to the lyrics. How did that happen with Tales?
I was reading Herman Hesse quite a lot, and it all revolves around Bill Bruford again, because I went to his wedding, and I'd just seen King Crimson with Bill Bruford in the band, and they had this wild and crazy percussionist dancing around the stage, jumping up against metal things and banging with microphones. And his name was Jamie Muir. And he was quite extraordinary. And he was at the wedding, and I had to go, and I wanted to say hi. Anyway, so I said to Jay, I was very sort of humble because I was mesmerized by the way he performed. And I said, why and how do you do what you do, man? He looked at me, he said, just a minute. So he went away, and he came back with a book, and it was the autobiography of a yogi by Paramanandananda. And I said, well, thank you. But then went on tour with Yes, and I was reading it all the way through the tour. And it's such an opening work in terms of understanding our spiritual connection around the world, how we're all connected spiritually, and our Christ consciousness is all together connected. And there are 4 risen masters, which are Buddha, Krishna, Muhammad, and Jesus. And I really like that idea that we're not separated. We're all connected by these beautiful people. And that's what the album was all about, trying to awaken my energy musically and lyrically about where I was going consciously, I think, and feeling, the remembering, the ancient, the ritual of life, and all, the revealing of life, the remembering of life, the ancient energies that we still don't know much about, and the ritual of life. That's why I got everybody playing drums at the end of the show. It's kind of fantastic, That was then.
Yeah. So from what I've read about you and followed you, you're a fairly spiritual person, and this connectivity, it comes across musically without preaching. There are words, sometimes symbolic, that mesh with this really beautiful orchestral music that, I always found it made me pause, made me think. And I think it kind of opened my mind a bit. Was that intentional or happenstance?
That's what I do. I just feel that emotionally I'm singing about my connection with my learning, the teachings that I'm understanding, and my spiritual growth. We're all spiritual beings, and whether we understand that or not is not up to me. It's just the way we are. And I've often mentioned that the only reason we live is to find the spiritual connection within, and life will become more clear, a difference to why you live and what you try to do in life, and how you love as much as you can, because love is everything. All you need is love was Krishna. Even though I thought it was the Beatles song, but it was from Krishna. So the idea of teaching is one thing, preaching is another. Preaching is you do this, you do that. I've never honestly thought about my work. You've got to be like this, or you're going to the other place. No, it doesn't work that way. All I'm doing is spelling out my thoughts. I had an album a few years ago, Change We Must. And we must change as we're going through this incredible change now.
Absolutely.
Consciously, but we are going through a mega change as soon as we get the orange man away from the TV, let him lose all his money and go that way. We're surrounded by great musicians all the time. And I must say that Jacob Collier sort of freed me up to understand the meaning of jazz in ways. And I met Roland Kirk and Charlie Mingus, and I loved what they did. I met Keith Jarrett when he was 10 in Paris. unbelievable, but I didn't quite understand it, you know. But now it's taken me a while, but I seriously understand the blending of jazz fusion, and being able to work with Jean-Luc Ponty the other years gone by. You just realized that jazz, rock, and blues and everything all melds together. And the kind of music I do is a mishmash of everything, I think.
And you know what I noticed that, and tell me if I have the time frame correctly. You know, Wakeman leaves the band. You do Relayer. You take some time off, and that's when you start doing some Jon Anderson projects, some collaborative projects. Actually, I think it was after Relayer, before Going for the One, where I started to see you do other things, and that's kind of what I was getting at earlier. Even though Going for the One, interestingly, while it had songs with hooks, it has my favorite Yes song of all times. And when I listen to it or see it live, Awakening, it really, to me, that is sort of, I don't want to say it, maybe I should. Yes's swan song. It's the song that kind of all of Yes comes together in one song.
I agree. Thank you. I remember performing it in Iceland with the local wonderful band of musicians, orchestra, and a choir. And it was like being in heaven, if heaven could be anywhere. It was there, that moment in time. And the video of Awaken, that show, pure magic. And when Rick rejoined the band, that was a great revelation for me, because I was able to connect with Rick again. And we actually spent a lot of time working on that Awaken, the piece of music. It was quite a magical experience.
I saw a show that you did at the Beacon Theater in New York. And at that time, I think Jazziz was about maybe 15, 20 years old. So I was in the business. I had a record company. I was going to concerts and getting a little bit different. I was taking it in a little bit differently than just a fan. And what I watched was the audience. And I watched this audience from old people who are obviously older, that were fans from the early days, to young people who had checked you out from more recent Yes. But when Awakening came, when you performed that, there was this spiritual moment in the audience where there were the old Yes fans literally just having their hands up saying, "This is it." And the newer ones saying, "I've never experienced anything like this musically."
Yeah.
I love watching the audience.
Many times performing that piece of music, I've felt so, it's like a surreal feeling on stage. Because one of the things about being in Yes was we really had to, before we went on stage, I'd always say, "Come on, guys, we really tighten up and work." And we knew we had to make it work. There was never a loose gig. It was weird. Every gig we were really on the ball on with some music. And I have to thank Chris especially, because he was always very strong on making sure everybody played well. And we're open to it. So when the music would take us on stage and the audience, we were already going up there, you know. So we felt what the audience felt. It was quite a magical thing. And I'm still going through that with my last band last year, 1,000 Hands. These are great musicians, and I was able to modify some of their musical ideas and make Yes music a little bit different. And it really sounded fantastic to me. I really felt very proud to have got to this place in my life, 75-year-old, interested in doing new music. And that's what 1,000 Hands is all about.
Yes, 1,000 Hands. Good segue. It's gorgeous. It definitely reminds me of some of the best Yes, and that makes me think some of the best Jon Anderson. It's a little bittersweet for me because it's maybe some of the last recording work done by Chris and Larry Coryell.
Yeah. I was working on the initial songs in 1990 up in Big Bear near LA. And Chris and Alan were in LA. So I called them up and said, would you like to play on a couple of tracks? I just took the 24 track down to a studio, spent an afternoon with them, and that was that. And like you say, you hear it and you know it's Chris and you know it's Alan really.
Right. But the other artists that you brought onto the album, you know, Ian Anderson on flute, Billy Cobham, jazz guys, Jean-Luc Ponty, Steve Morse is kind of a fusion guy, certainly Chick Corea, Stuart Hamm, Tower Power horns. I mean, there's a lot of musicianship on that record.
It's true. I remember when I'd recorded Come Up in Big Bear. And 28 years later, we're in the studio, and Michael Franklin, as a producer, said, I'm going to get Billy Cobham to play on this track. And I said, please, please. And as soon as I heard him performing the track, all I could say was, turn the drums up. That's all you can do. And then he goes, Chick Corea. And it just blew my mind. Oh, God.
Oh, Chick is something else. So when the world settles down, I'm assuming you're going to take 1,000 Hands on tour.
Yeah.
Are you going to bring some of these jazz legends along with you?
Well, we talked about doing some show in New York at the old theater there. It's beautiful theater. I'm trying to think of the guy. Hammerstein Theater. It's a very famous place created by Hammerstein, of Rodgers and Hammerstein. Mm-hmm. And the idea was to bring everybody in and do a special week of recordings and performances and things. That was going to be done this February just gone, but things happened. Next year, we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
In this world.
Well, 1,000 Hands. What? A lot of your albums had some very interesting meanings. Yes, albums and your own solo projects and other projects. But what does 1,000 Hands mean?
It just popped up because originally the album was going to be called Ocelot, which means us. Because when we were recording in Big Bear, I got in touch with one of the Beach Boys. I went to NAMM, the
musical instrument show,
exposition, whatever you want to call it. And I was on little stage singing Help Me Rhonda with a couple of friends. And there was Johnson in the audience right in front of me. Kind of freaked me out. So we got together and I went up to Monterey, where he and a couple of other guys from the Beach Boys, and I was going to get them to sing on the album, but it never happened. Maybe I'll get them to sing on chapter 2.
There you go. This is chapter 1, exactly.
Yeah, Wayne Shorter was another guy I wanted to get played.
Oh, Wayne.
Great guy. So.
Oh yeah.
The idea was that one day the producer said, why do you call it 1,000 Hands instead of Ocelot? And I thought, why not? So 1,000 Hands. Because I'd actually written down all the people that influenced me over the years. And I posted it on my website 10 years ago, or 10 years ago. And I thought it's a good idea for people to do that. Write down all the people that have influenced you over your life. And I had probably about 100 people like Nina Simone and, thousands of people. But 1,000 Hands was like the idea of all these
there you
people
go.
Influenced.
So 1,000 Hands, it's I hear it's out on July 31st. It's going to be available as a double gatefold vinyl, back like the old days,
Yeah.
on CD, and certainly on all the digital platforms. And we certainly look forward to. I've heard it; it's wonderful. And John, it's been a pleasure. I could say it's been I've been wanting to do this for decades, and thank you for joining us on this show. And please don't be a stranger.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.